Why am I finding it so hard to connect to self-compassion?
So there are actually two big reasons. So one is just how the nervous system works. And then you add on to that culture. Evolution and culture, it's not surprising that it's not the first instinct that we have. This is what I find about the research over the years. We've done a lot of research. It doesn't really matter how you practice. One pathway isn't necessarily better than another, but it does matter that we practice.
There is a kind of a bro culture that's been forming for a while, and I believe that that's increasing our stress, which is actually making us sicker.
I think you're totally right. All of that is contingent on getting it right, getting it perfect, doing your whatever you need to do. And that's what causes the problem. Whereas self-compassion, it's like whether or not you get it all right, you're worth it. Your worth is intrinsic. It comes simply from being a human being. And so when you base your worth in your humanity, then you do these things, like maybe you do want to exercise and you're doing it because you care about yourself.
What are the gender differences between men and women with self-compassion?
Women are actually a little less self-compassionate than men are. And that's because here's the thing about self-compassion. It allows us to be our true, authentic self because we're less focused on what other people tell us or whether or not other people approve of us. They can be their true, authentic selves. That's an act of bravery and courage given that our society judges us so much if we don't fit into the box that they think we should be in.
I've loved watching this community grow and especially starting to meet you all in the comments section. But one thing, although our views are going up, our subscribers aren't. So I'd love for you to hit the subscribe button as a thank you if you've enjoyed any of our episodes. It allows us to bring bigger, more exciting guests and more continuous content. So if you've enjoyed it, just like a gentleman's handshake, please do subscribe.
Kristin, welcome to Live Well, Be Well. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really happy to be here.
I am thrilled to have an entire conversation on something that I believe is the missing ingredient to our health in so many numerous ways, whether it's our physical health, to our mental health, to our emotional health, to, dare I say it on the scientific podcast, our spiritual health that I am also very much connected to. And I don't think we talk about it enough. And you even mentioned before how sometimes it can even be common sense we might mention this word, but so many of us can find it very hard. So I wanted to start off because you are a pioneer researcher in this field, over 20 years of self-compassion. And you have had TED Talks reach over 13 million. And I am personally very influenced by your work. And today we're going to bring the science of self-compassion because people might be not aware that there is an abundance of science that you have helped pioneer here. So before we get into everything on how it can help us, benefit us, enrich our lives, help our health, I thought it would be a really good place to start off with. What is self-compassion in the kind of scientific definition?
Right. Okay. So if you just think from the Latin roots of the word compassion, passion means to suffer, come is with. So it's basically, how do we show up for suffering? And normally we think of that for other people's suffering. When other people are going through a hard time or struggling in some way, can we be there for them? Are we supportive? Are we kind? Are we warm? And so self-compassion is simply how do we show up for our own suffering? Again, whether that's mental, emotional, or even physical. Are we warm? Are we supportive? Are we caring toward ourselves? Or, which is actually often the case, are we cold? Are we harsh? Are we judgmental? And so, that's the easy way to think about what self-compassion is. There is a more scientific operational definition that I use because over 20 years ago, I wanted to do research on self-compassion, and I knew I'd have to create a scale to measure it. And I knew just saying something like, how do you show up for yourself was not precise enough for science. And I realized there are actually three elements to self-compassion. So there's the kindness, which is kind of the most obvious. Also mindfulness. So mindfulness is the ability to be present with what is, kind of to make some space for it without just fighting it or ignoring it. And we can't show up for ourselves in our pain if we're either stiff upper lipping it. It's not a problem. And the Brits have a problem with that. Not a problem. I'll just soldier on. You can't be self-compassionate if you ignore the fact that you're struggling and need help. On the other hand, if you're lost in it, if you're like you're drowning in it, wallowing in, your pain and you can't see anything else, then you also can't help yourself. So mindfulness gives you that ability to kind of be with yourself when you're struggling, with some space and distance, but also some connection. And then third element, really, really important, is a sense of humanity, a sense of shared humanity. This is what makes compassion different than pity. So, if I said to you, oh, Sarah, I really pity you, you're going to be, you're not going to like that, because that means I'm looking down on you. But if I say, hey, I've been there, I can really relate to what you're feeling, you're going to like that. That's compassion, because it's saying, I'm a human being, you're a human being. This happens to human beings. So it's the same thing with self-compassion. What differentiates it from self-pity is not woe is me, poor me. It's like, hey, I'm a human being. I'm imperfect. I'm living an imperfect life. I'm doing the best I can. And so those three elements together is what we measure in the self-compassion scale, and which is really the foundation of the research.
I think like hearing that, people go, yeah, that makes sense. But then I had this moment when I remember first coming across your research, and I thought, why am I finding it so hard to connect to self-compassion? Like, what is it that I understand that being nicer to myself, I'm probably going to have a better outcome, but why am I struggling to connect? And I think we live in a society where this isn't the norm. And I wonder, over all of these years, what have you found out on why people don't automatically go to this response on how they handle situations?
Yeah, so there are actually two big reasons. So, we shouldn't beat ourselves up because we beat ourselves up. It's actually natural, believe it or not. So one is just how the nervous system works. So when we are personally threatened, and of course, if we make a mistake or fail or something difficult happens, we feel threatened. So we go into fight, flight, or freeze. It's the most instinctual response. It's linked to our sympathetic nervous system. And so what happens when we feel threatened, we try to fight the problem. But of course, if the problem is ourself, we try to fight ourselves with criticism. It's kind of that like this approach, thinking somehow it'll keep us safe if we just fight the issue. Or we flee into a sense of shame and isolation, kind of like evolutionarily, if we pissed off the group, they might come after us. So it's that desire to kind of hang our head in shame is also natural. Or we freeze and we get stuck. It's kind of like we're deer in the headlights. Well, maybe if I just don't move, the problem will go away. Now, when your good friend fails or makes a mistake, you aren't so personally threatened. So instead of the fight, flight, or freeze system kicking in, another system which evolved to keep us safe, which is called the tend and befriend system, kicks in. This is also called the mammalian caregiving response. So, evolutionarily, with our offspring or our group members, it feels natural to care for them, to be there for them, to help and support them. But again, the system really evolved for other people. So we do have to do a little bit of a hack. We have to hack into the system that evolved to care for others and use it with ourselves. The good news is it can be done, but it's not our first instinct. So that's partly it. And then you add on to that culture. I mean, culture tells us we should be self-sacrificing. We should put other people first. We don't want to be like lazy or self-indulgent or selfish or narcissistic. We confuse all these there are a lot of negative self-focused states, and we confuse them with self-compassion, which is a healthy way of being with ourselves. So, evolution and culture, it's not surprising that it's not the first instinct that we have.
So that's really interesting. It's kind of a twofold, because I did find it much easier to be compassionate to others, but I would find that much harder to redirect into myself. So that's something that I really found. So something that I've found that's helped me when I try to get to those stressful situations is I say to myself, what would I say to a friend? Because that automatically puts me into a response of, how would I treat somebody else in this position who I obviously seem to love and care very dearly, and trying to give that love back to me. And I love that you mentioned about a bit of narcissism and selfishness, because I think that's something that people can feel very scared of, trying to connect to self-compassion, that they're going to become very selfish, that people are going to think they're very self-indulgent. And it becomes kind of a nuanced area. So for any of the self-critical people out there that are listening to this thinking, well, if I become self-compassionate, I'm going to lay on that sofa and I'm going to do absolutely nothing, what would you say to them? Because I'm sure you've had to say this a lot to convince people.
Yeah. So there are about 4 or 5 really main myths. The thing about that it being selfish. So this is why the common humanity element is so important to self-compassion, and why I don't call it self-love. I mean, self-love is important, but a narcissist may have self-love. So it's really about framing yourself as an imperfect human being like all other imperfect human beings, not expecting yourself to be superhuman, but also not seeing yourself as special and above average either, right? So we're all human beings. We're all imperfect. We're all doing the best we can. And so we're really it's a very humble agenda. We're just including ourselves in the circle of compassion. And when compassion flows inward, it means we have more resources to flow outward for other people. So it's not selfish at all, quite the opposite. For instance, it reduces burnout, and, it allows you to be a better friend or better partner or better parent. So that one's a myth. Another one is that it's self-indulgent, which basically means you're just going to give yourself pleasure. Give yourself a break. Be nice to yourself. Maybe, eat whatever you want, because if it tastes good, who cares if it's healthy for you? Or, just like take a break. Don't go into work, or don't get that degree, because, people think self-indulgence is just giving yourself pleasure. But of course, just like a parent, an indulgent parent is not a compassionate parent. A compassionate parent says to their kid, you got to do this. No, it's not fun and it's going to be hard, but it's important that you do this to learn and grow and be healthy. And it's because I care about you that I'm going to push you a little bit harder than maybe even you're comfortable with. So that's the exact same thing with ourselves. We aren't self-indulgent because that causes us harm. We do what's healthy for us, which is reflected in how we take care of our bodies, of how we spend our time. Sometimes it means doing something a little uncomfortable because it's good for us. And so that's related to, but not exactly the same as motivation. So motivation is actually, our research shows that's the number one block to self-compassion. And that's because self-criticism kind of works as a motivator. Let's face it, a lot of people have gotten through a graduate school or done something really hard just by being so hard on themselves that it's so uncomfortable not to reach their goal, because they're going to slam themselves so much that they do it. So it's kind of like, imagine a really harsh teacher who's really punitive to their kids. Yeah, those kids, because they're scared of the teacher, they probably will study a little bit more, and it may help somewhat for them to work and achieve. But there's going to be a lot of negative consequences to being so harsh. For instance, those kids may lose faith in themselves. It may undermine their confidence. And our confidence is a real important predictor of success. It may create performance anxiety. So if you're so worried that someone's going to yell at you, whether it's your teacher or coach or yourself, it's going to create all this extra anxiety that's actually going to just detract from your ability to do your best. The most important reason why it's actually not so effective in the long run is it undermines our ability to learn from our failures. I mean, it's a truism that's true. Failure is our best teacher. That's how we learn. We fail. We say, what didn't work so well? What can I do better next time? And that's how we learn and grow. What happens if you just shame yourself when you fail, that you can't think about, how much, what might I learn from this? Because you're just so full of shame and you want to hang your head and go off into a corner. So the research is very, very clear on this. So self-compassion is a more effective motivator than criticism. It reduces our performance anxiety, it gives us more self-confidence, and it allows us to learn from our mistakes, which actually in the long run increases our ability to perform at our best. But, people don't know that. So that's why I tell them all the time, but it makes sense if you think about how to motivate your students or your children, that encouragement, by the way, clear feedback saying, it's not a problem, sweetheart. If there is a problem, that's not kind. That's coddling. But saying, hey, there's a problem. This isn't working well, but I believe in you. How can I support you to make a change? That's going to be the most effective way to make a change.
I'm so pleased to partner with Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to help entrepreneurs stand out and succeed online. Whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website, engage your audience, and sell anything from products to content all in one place. I've been using Squarespace since day one because it's accessible and it looks professional, even for a tech phobe like me. Squarespace gives you all the tools to create and sell your own online courses. I launched my own Inner Circle membership last year using their platform. You can upload videos, customize your layouts, and add a paywall to monetize your content.
Now, if you're looking to grow your business, the email campaigns feature is a game changer. It allows you to create targeted email campaigns, engage your community, drive sales, and track success with built-in analytics. Head to squarespace.com/livewell for your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LIVEWELL for 10% off a website or domain. Yeah, I think hearing that for people aligns very well with burnout. So when people are trying to motivate themselves, right, it's like hard plus hard equals success. And that's kind of the mindset that I was brought up in. And I had burnout at 23 and I was hospitalized for months, and had to try and live this perfection life as a model, very kind of high up in New York. And my body gave way, my brain gave way. And in the end, I was in hospital. And it really made me realize that how I spoke to myself was so detrimental. But again, I was in the modeling industry, so everybody was speaking to me also very detrimental. So I was getting it from both ways, really, externally and internally. And it's interesting that, throughout the last 10 years, even going into the clinic as a nutritionist, seeing people come in and when they're failing at maybe meeting their goals, or they feel like they're failing, or they're not being perfection enough in what they're eating and they're too scared to maybe bring that to the meeting, there's a lot of shame that holds into that, and a lot of self-criticism that deepens that wound even more. And it's interesting because you've just written a book and it's just come out on burnout, on how self-compassion can be kind of an antidote, I want to say, to burnout. And you say in that 3/4 of people can feel burnout, which is huge. And it's only going to grow in the world that we're living in. So how can people, when they're thinking about motivation, which can normally lead to burnout when they're being too self-critical, how can they start implementing self-compassion into their daily lives to, one, reduce burnout, and basically, two, get that motivation that they really need?
Yeah. So, if you think of what burnout is at the broadest level, it's the inability to cope with the stress that's placed on us, whether that stress is external or internal, or often both. Like you said, a combination of both. The self-criticism, we stress ourselves out by saying, you have to be perfect, you have to do more. But the culture also stresses us out by saying, you have to be perfect, you have to do more. And so when we can't cope with our stress, we tend to do three main things. First, we become exhausted, like you in the extreme case. We just end up, we can't get out of bed, or we're hospitalized, or we're just totally flattened. The other thing we tend to do is we tend to blame ourselves for the fact that we can't hack it. And so we feel incompetent, so we internalize it. And then the other thing that's really interesting that happens is the fancy psychological term is depersonalization, but it basically means we just stop caring as much. We stop caring as much about other people or about our work or about ourselves. So we hide we call into our little shell because it hurts too much to care because of all the stress. And so self-compassion helps prevent all of those. So the exhaustion, if you do care about yourself, you will realize, actually, in order to care for myself, sometimes I do need to take a break or draw a boundary or say no. I need to value my needs as well as what just everyone else is telling me I need to do. So that valuing our own needs and that commitment to our own well-being means we don't do quite as much. We don't become quite as exhausted. Okay, so that's one. And if we do get exhausted, or we fail, or we can't cope, we don't blame ourselves for it. We kind of realize it's the situation, or sometimes we contribute, but making mistakes doesn't mean that we are a mistake. So we can make mistakes or make wrong decisions, and we realize, okay, well, that's part of the human condition. What can I learn from this? So we don't feel so incompetent. So it reduces that one. And here's the really great thing. We don't need to shut our hearts down, because self-compassion allows us to keep our hearts open to ourselves and the world, right? We can still care, because our caring, it's not like it's predicated in our humanity. Yeah, life is messy. It's for us, for other people. It's difficult. We aren't going to get things right. Sometimes we like to say the goal of practice is simply to be a compassionate mess. That doesn't mean that our goal is not to be a mess. Just to be clear, our goal is, when the mess of life arises, and it will, because life's messy, our goal is actually, how do I be compassionate to myself in the midst of the mess? And another way of saying that is, how do I keep my heart open? How do I keep my care alive, my warmth alive when things are so difficult? I just want to crawl into my little ball. And so that's why it's so powerful for reducing, preventing, and also healing from burnout. Whether you're burnt out because your job's stressful, the stress of life, just the political situation, the world situation, the environmental situation, being a parent. I'm actually a special needs parent, and all parents can burn out, but it can be really especially intense if you're a special needs parent. There's so many stressors in life. And so to commit to showing up for ourselves in a kind, supportive, helpful way when the stress of life happens is just huge.
How do you do it in your daily life when stuff gets really hard? Like, what are your tools or strategies to implement self-compassion?
Yeah, so there's a lot of them that I use. And by the way, I've been practicing self-compassion for about 25 years now. I started several years before I researched it. Actually, I learned it in Buddhist psychology. I didn't come up with the idea. But I still am a mess. Absolutely. I still make mistakes. I still have shame arise. Shame's actually just evolutionary emotion. Sometimes you do something and you feel yourself turning bright, hot red or wanting to crawl into a hole. So all that still happens. But what I do very quickly is I've learned to embrace myself in the midst of those moments. So, I'm there for myself. I use a lot of physical touch to give myself compassion. That's because it kind of cuts through all this chatter in your brain. It actually works. We have research showing it increases heart rate variability. It reduces cortisol and inflammation. It actually reduces parasympathetic nervous system reactivity. Simply doing something like this changes your physiology. It actually makes you feel warm and supported. So that's probably my go-to, just physical touch. But I'll say things like, I'll remind myself the goal of practice is simply to be a compassionate mess. Or I'll say things to myself like, yeah, this moment is really tough, but I really want to be kind to myself and support myself in this moment. So kind of little things I've learned in the course of the day. Whenever that feeling arises, that either mental or emotional or even physical discomfort arises, it's kind of like my clue, my cue, my bell, so to speak, to be kind to myself. And it really does make a difference. I wish I could say that it made me make mistakes less often. Maybe I've had a 5% improvement, maybe 10%, but not much more than that. But that's okay. I'm good at being a compassionate mess, that's for sure.
I mean, I guess the whole philosophy of it is it's not trying to stop you making mistakes. It's just trying to, I feel like it's trying to help alleviate some stress. That's how I see self-compassion. And I think stress is the biggest killer of today. And we're told all the time, have a positive mindset. Or, if you just think this way, you'll reach that goal. And I did that for ages and I ended up in a complete mess. And I see it now in the kind of well-being culture, wellness culture that's arisen in the last 10 years of optimization checklists. Do this, do this, do this. And by 8 o'clock, you have meant to have done, 2 hours of meditation, breath work, cold plunges, all these things. And there is a kind of a bro culture that's been forming for a while. And I really believe that is adding to our stress of trying to be healthy. And then we're trying to make sure that we're getting that mindset correct, right? And there's no conversation for any lenience of stress reduction. And I believe that that's increasing our stress, which is actually making us sicker. And that's my philosophy on.
I think you're totally right. So the reality is I'm not okay and you're not okay, and that's okay. Right. So, and it doesn't mean that, of course, if you want to do exercise, you should think about what you need and what's good for you. But you don't want to make first of all, the really key is, so when I first came into the field, one of the big things I differentiated was self-esteem and self-compassion. So they're both forms of self-worth. So self-esteem is an estimation, a judgment of worth. Compassion, your worth, comes from just being a human mess like everyone else. So one is contingent and one isn't. And so the problem with a lot of the self-help stuff, which is do your breath work, meditate, do the plunge, is it's kind of like, if you want to be a good person, it's all of that is contingent on getting it right, getting it perfect, doing your whatever you need to do. And that's what causes the problem. Whereas self-compassion, it's like whether or not you get it all right, you're worthy. Your worth is intrinsic. It comes simply from being a human being. And by the way, you don't have to be special. All human beings intrinsically have human worth. It's kind of like a human right. And so when you base your worth in your humanity, then you do these things, like maybe you do want to exercise, and of course you probably will want to exercise and eat right, but you aren't doing it in order to achieve the goal of being worthy. You're doing it because you care about yourself. And therefore, if you do make a misstep, then okay, well, that's only human. Maybe I can try this approach or do something a little bit different. And at the end of the day, if I don't look perfect or I'm not, that's okay too. The biggest question is, am I happy? Am I happy? Am I fulfilled? Do I have the relationships I want? Am I healthy? And then who's going to decide what's right for me? I mean, going back to the weight issue, for instance, I don't know what the right weight for me is. So just because society tells me I should look a certain way doesn't mean that's where I'm healthiest. It comes from the inside. It's very intrinsic, whether it's how much you exercise or what you eat or how you spend your time or whether or not you meditate. It comes from within. It comes from love, not from feeling like I've got to do this in order to be lovable. And once you do that, it changes everything.
Yeah. It's changed my practice and what I kind of teach people when they come in. And I think this is something that people don't talk about, especially in the field of nutritional research, is self-compassion. So, thinking about the goal that someone's trying to achieve, first of all, I always ask why. Like, why are you trying to achieve that goal? That's like the biggest thing. Is this an external pressure, or you think you're going to be accepted when you reach this stage? Or is this from an internal place that is really important to you to be able to move your body a little bit more, or to whatever that internal goal
That
is?
may be really relevant to reaching your life goals, but if you aren't, maybe not,
Exactly. This is the biggest thing. And I think trying to tell people to be self-compassionate when they slip up, because we all slip up. I mean, we all slip up. Nobody eats perfectly the entire time, maybe unless you're Brian Johnson, who was doing the most extreme experiment of all time on human nature. But apart from him, I don't think, there isn't anyone that has a day where they don't eat the way that they think they should be. So I was so amazed by seeing all this research you've done on how it can also help health behaviors. And I'd love to kind of start with the kind of dieting, weight measurement realm of self-compassion. And you've noted before about the donut study, and I'd love to talk about it because I think this will transform the way people think about when they maybe have had a cheat day, and I even hate saying a cheat day because I don't believe in those. I think actually when somebody has something they really enjoy and then feel guilt and shame afterwards, this, I believe, is such an amazing thing to hear because it can really help reframe somebody's mindset around those moments when shame, as you said, becomes such a strong emotion.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess the underlying thing we have to consider partly is why are you eating? And oftentimes we eat not because we're hungry, sometimes not even so much because it tastes good, but we're eating our emotions, right? We feel badly and we eat to think about it. When you eat and you're really full, it kind of numbs you out a little bit. And sometimes that can numb the edge off of difficult emotions. And so one of the basic findings, and I will get to the donut study, don't worry. But one of the basic findings of the research is that it reduces emotional eating and increases intuitive eating. Because when those difficult emotions come up, you have another resource to deal with them, which is compassion. You embrace yourself, you embrace your pain, you remember you aren't alone and that you're human. And you don't need to numb yourself out through something like, eating as a way of coping with your emotions. And one of the ways that plays out is that when people do have weight loss goals and then they don't meet them, or they, so to speak, blow their diet, you call it a cheat day, or they do something that's not what they wanted to eat, then oftentimes we feel so guilty about it. We feel like, well, I'm a failure. I might as well just eat more because, I've already blown it and I'm a failure. And I feel bad about it. So I'm just going to kind of screw it. Right. And so one of the very first studies on self-compassion and eating behavior, which came out I don't know, almost 20 years ago. It's one of the earliest studies called the donut study. So basically what they did is they looked at a bunch of undergraduate women who were dieting. We aren't even supposed to say the word diet these days, but back then they called it dieting. They had weight loss goals. And they didn't know that that's why they were recruited for the study. So they were told they were put into a taste testing study. And as part of this taste testing study, one of the things they had to taste was a glazed donut. It's like a really fatty, greasy donut. And so half of the people, they said after eating the donut, yeah, it probably wasn't the healthiest thing. Trying to beat yourself up about it. As part of the study, everyone had to do it. Try to be kind to yourself and understanding. And then the other half, they didn't say anything, which is probably like, I can't believe I ate the whole donut. I can't believe my diet's ruined. Right? Who knows what was going on? And then they had a part 2 of the study, which is they asked them to taste some M&Ms. And they said, okay, here's a bowl of M&Ms. Taste however many you want, and let me know what you think. And so what they didn't know is they actually measured how many M&Ms the subjects ate. And they found that those who were told to be self-compassionate about eating the donut earlier ate fewer M&Ms in that part of the study. And those who were told and not anything and beat themselves up about eating the donut ate a lot more M&Ms. So that's the type of research you can do to show that often what happens is when we beat ourselves up, we either give up or we try to eat more as a way of controlling our difficult feelings. So there's a fair amount of research. I did one study actually with women who were struggling with body image. Very easy study. I just said, listen to the guided meditations on my website for 3 weeks. And what we found is after 3 weeks of doing that, their sense of self-worth was less contingent on their appearance. They're more able to get that sense of self-worth from the inside as opposed to how they looked. So, and there's a lot of research confirming these types of findings. So it makes a big difference. Why are we eating? Or why are we valuing ourselves? Are we really just valuing ourselves based on appearance, or not? Does it come from something deeper and more real and more stable, actually?
My number one rule is that health should be personalized and tailored to the individual. But it can be hard to do if we don't know where our current health status is. Are you someone who's been trying countless supplements and health trends but end up feeling no different? Before you even start thinking about these things, it's crucial to assess where your health status currently is. That's where Optimally Me can make a world of difference. Optimally Me is a health optimization platform that provides personalized health recommendations based on your unique biology and goals. It offers access to a variety of diagnostic blood tests, digital tools, and devices, helping you see the bigger picture of your health, whether it's metabolic, gut, hormone, mental, skin, or cardiovascular health. This is where your foundation of health should start, with the understanding of where it currently stands. What I love about Optimally Me is it allows you to analyze your health biomarkers and personalize your health journey. You can start your personalized journey with the full body MOT and DNA epigenetics blood tests. These tests assess multiple areas of your health and determine how lifestyle and environment are aging your body. Once you have your comprehensive health overview, you can start to connect your wearable devices and work with expert health coaches using the Optimally Me dashboard to support your health. And here is a little something for you. Use the code LWBW20 to get 20% off your order, because your health is personal and so should your health plan. Well, I guess as I'm listening to you talk about it, a lot of wanting to eat more to hide that pain, it's coming from a painful place.
Yes.
Self-compassion is starting to acknowledge that you're in pain.
Yes.
And that's such a big lever to kind of helping you change that mindset, as opposed to kind of wiring it that this is the only thing that's going to make me feel safe. Because I guess with pain, there's also emotional safety that comes into conversation. And self-compassion does help increase that emotional safety when you feel that you've got your own back, and when you feel that you're really worthy of doing something that's good for you, you create a lot more emotional safety in your body.
Yeah, so absolutely. So it creates a sense of emotional safety so that you don't need to do things like eat. Another thing kind of related to this is a lot of research showing it increases grit or stick-to-itness. So let's say you do have a goal, a nutritional goal, an exercise goal, weight loss goal, or whatever your goal is, and you do make a mistake, have a setback. What it does is because you aren't, kind of like that donut study, because you aren't blaming yourself, you're more able to just keep on trying. It's just like, okay, one foot in front of the other. Yes, it's expected that I'm going to fall. It's not going to be a perfect linear line, and that's okay. And therefore, I'll just stick to it. So it allows you to see what's important for you and to keep doing it, even if it's difficult and even if you stumble. And that's really huge because life's difficult. Whether you're trying to get a graduate degree or you're trying to raise kids or you're trying to be successful at your job, you will stumble. And so how are you with yourself? Again, how do you show up for yourself when you stumble? That's going to be a huge determinant of how strong you are, how resilient you are, and how able you are to keep going.
You mentioned one of the tools was meditations, which I know you have so many on your website, and self-compassionate body scans to really kind of connect more to our body, which I think in times of stress, which is, kind of an arching topic of the conversation, we dissociate from our bodies quite a lot. We get very much in our minds and we pull away from our bodies. Something else that I think could be really helpful to mention, which I know that you've done a lot on, is a self-compassionate letter. I'd love to talk about this because I remember I went to a retreat like 10 years ago. So after all of this happened and I came back to the UK from America, I started going to these like mind-body retreats. And they asked us to write a letter to ourselves in 6 months' time, and they were going to post it to us. And we had to do it from a very compassionate point of view. And we had to forgive ourselves for everything that's kind of happened in the past, and also where we really want to see ourselves in a scenario in 6 months' time. And they posted it to us in 6 months. And I remember having that. And I really remember how my mindset was changing even as I was writing it to myself. It was the first time that I was really putting up my thoughts to paper. So I thought it could be a really lovely thing to actually talk about for people who might be finding it hard to relate, that this could be a really great exercise for somebody to maybe connect to. And I know you've done a lot of research. Again, we'll highlight that word to show that this actually works.
Yeah, there was one study, actually it wasn't done by me, but people wrote a self-compassionate letter to themselves, I think every day for 7 days. And it reduced depression for 3 months and increased happiness for 6 months, just 7 days. So it's a really good investment of your time. And also there's a lot of research showing that writing in and of itself can be effective. I mean, you can just think these things to yourself, but there's something about putting the words on paper that makes them concrete. It's also, you feel a little more distance or objectivity when you're writing as opposed to just talking to yourself. So the idea is, writing, when you write a self-compassionate letter, you want to basically have 3 main elements. And if you want, you can have a paragraph of each, or it can just be themes of the letter. You want to be mindful, bring awareness to the fact that you're struggling. You want to validate your pain. Say something like, I know you're really struggling. I know you're really hurting. It's what when you're doing that, you're bringing mindfulness of the fact that pain and suffering is here. You want to remind yourself that you aren't alone, that it's normal, it's human, there's nothing wrong with you for going through this situation. It's part of being a human being. And then you want to give yourself some words of kindness, some words of warmth, support, understanding. And again, it's very, if you're having difficulty, an easy way to do this is to think, what would I say to a really good friend who is going through the exact same situation I'm going through? And then the words come a lot more easily. So you can write it as if you're writing to a good friend, even though that's yourself. But then when you read the words, you read them as applying to yourself. And it can be very powerful, very, very powerful.
It kind of goes hand in hand as well with journaling, which I also think is a really powerful tool for self-compassion.
Yeah. So journaling, you can do it every night. You can write a letter, but some people actually, personally, I'm not one who likes to write. I've got terrible handwriting. It doesn't do it for me. So, I mean, it's great if you like to write, it's good. But you also can just say it to yourself. So I do something called the self-compassion break, which is I might put my hand on my heart and I'll go through the 3 steps. I'll say, Kristin, this is really hard. It's part of life. You're only human. You aren't the only one. Many, many people are going through something similar. And I'll say some words of kindness. Maybe think of what I might say to a friend and say something to me. This is what I find about the research over the years. We've done a lot of research. It doesn't really matter how you practice. For instance, meditation isn't any better than just putting your hand on your heart for 30 seconds every day or writing a letter. They all work. So what works is what's right for you. One pathway isn't necessarily better than another, but it does matter that we practice because, again, we have to remember it's not natural by evolution, or it's not the way we are raised by our culture. So we do have to build the muscle. Here's the thing, it's not actually hard to do because we built the skill for others. We know how to be compassionate to our friends or our pets or our kids or our community members. We know what to say, we know how it feels, but what's not so natural is remembering to do it for ourselves. That's kind of the evolution. It's hard to remember. And culturally, it's hard to give ourselves permission because we get these messages like it's selfish or it's going to make us lazy or somehow it's bad. So if we can get through the fact that it doesn't come instinctually and give ourselves permission once we know that actually culture's wrong on this one, research very clearly shows it's not going to do any of these things we're afraid of, then we already know how to do it. That's the good news. It's not rocket science.
You mentioned something there that made me think. I wonder which country has the most self-compassion.
So we've done a little research on this, and the research I would say isn't definitive. I do know that the UK is kind of near the bottom.
Yeah,
and I hate to say it, America is also fairly low. Our self-esteem is the highest in the world. We think we're special and above average, but our self-compassion is kind of low. But the UK, and I've lived in the UK, I know it's because of this stiff upper lip mentality. And so, by the way, self-compassion doesn't have to look like wallowing. It can still be like firm, resolute, quiet, but it's like, yeah, this is hard. Well, I'm not the only one. Okay, so how can I support myself? You don't even have to use soft and fluffy words. Support is a good, strong, how can I be strong in this moment? But still acknowledging that it's hard for you. But unfortunately, because I think of the cultural norms against self-pity or complaining, which is a strength of the culture, but when it goes too far, it means that people are starting to be cold to themselves. You aren't being strong. You're actually kneecapping yourself when you're cold to yourself. When you call yourself names, you're weakening yourself. You aren't making yourself stronger. So the UK, Western European countries tend to be a little lower. Some of the South American cultures tend to be a little higher, like Brazil, it's a little higher. Interestingly, in Thailand, they had very high levels of self-compassion. I think that's because Buddhism is so kind of woven into the culture. But it's not an East-West thing. In Taiwan, they had very low levels of self-compassion because in more Confucian cultures, the idea is that self-criticism, you need to be self-critical to get yourself to work hard. So, and this is the thing, it's a slight line. You can be fierce mama bear with yourself. You can be like firm and clear. This isn't working. This needs to change. This, and this, would be better if you improved it, but it doesn't mean that you are bad. Right? See, that's the whole difference. It can be constructive criticism. Yeah. Okay. This isn't working so well. This needs to change. And how can I help you? I believe in you. I care about you. Not if you don't make these changes, you're a piece of, what. That's the whole difference is why are you doing it? And how is it coming across? When someone's being tough out of love and if someone's being tough out of meanness, and it feels a lot different.
It makes me think about men and women, actually, as you're talking about this as well. Like, what are the gender differences between men and women with self-compassion? Because naturally and instinctively, I think women would connect to this concept more than a man.
Yeah, so it's very interesting. I've done a fair amount of research on gender role. By the way, just to be clear, we're talking about gender role socialization, how you're raised, not like gender identity, whether you're trans or cisgender, but how we're raised makes a difference in terms of the messages we get. So believe it or not, so yes, women, because we're raised to be nurturers and the idea of compassion is really part of our socialization, we do have more compassion for others in general than men do. And if you come to one of my workshops, 80% of the people are going to be women because the idea that just the word self-compassion, being self-focused and compassion, it doesn't speak to male gender roles. But women are actually a little less self-compassionate than men are. And that's because we're told to be self-sacrificing. Compassion for others is really emphasized, which means we feel a little less entitled to meet our own needs, right? We tend to put others first. But there's also two different forms of self-compassion. So I like to call it the tender and the fierce. And so tender self-compassion is this more nurturing form of self-compassion. It's about acceptance of imperfection. And I would say women are a little more comfortable with that, the way they're raised, than men are. And men are bullied if they're too sensitive. And that's hard because men don't have access to this really powerful strength of accepting your difficult emotions, even though it actually makes you stronger, especially in crisis situations. Men are told that it makes them a sissy, and they don't have that. And it kind of reduces their emotional intelligence level. Fierce self-compassion is another form of compassion. This is where we take action to keep ourselves safe and to help ourselves. That might mean drawing boundaries. That might mean saying no to people. That might mean, motivating change or actually meeting your own needs. Say, my needs count too. And so gender role socialization can actually work against women here. We have to be nice. We can't say no. We can't ask for the pay we think we deserve at work because people won't like me. We get a lot of those messages, and that can hinder women's ability to be fierce. So, it's kind of complicated, but I would say here's the thing about self-compassion. And I can say this honestly, it allows us to be our true, authentic self because we're less focused on what other people tell us or whether or not other people approve of us. And we can ask ourselves, what is right for me? What do I need? And that means that anyone, regardless of, gender role orientation or anything, they can be their true, authentic selves. It's kind of radical, actually, if you think about it. Being fully authentic, that's an act of bravery and courage, given that our society judges us so much if we don't fit into the box that they think we should be in.
I want to share something that's helped my skincare routine, the Bon Charge Red Light Face Mask. Red light therapy is fantastic for your skin because it helps reduce inflammation and increases collagen production, making your skin look healthier and more youthful. The Bon Charge Red Light Face Mask uses the optimal wavelengths of red 630 nanometers and infrared 850 nanometers light to deliver these benefits. Now, someone in my early 30s, wrinkles aren't a huge issue yet, but the minor lines I did have are already smoothed out. And what really surprised me was how well this mask works for acne. It helps settle the acne quicker and reduces any dark spots afterwards. It's been a real game changer for those unexpected breakouts. Now, prevention is key for me, and using this mask is a great step to help reduce the signs of aging. It's also become vital in my self-care routine. And during this time, I incorporate the meditation practice, making it one of my favorite times of the day. So if you're curious about how red light therapy can help your skin, I highly recommend giving it a try. Go to boncharge.com/livewell and use the code LIVEWELL for 15% off your order.
Hugely. The word that comes up for me when you were saying that, and I was writing it down, was a people pleaser.
Yes.
So someone who, especially as a woman, thinking, okay, well, I don't want to upset somebody, so I will just do this at the expense of myself. And you do it all the time, whether it's at home, whether it's at work, whatever, family. And it sounds that actually like the person who could really benefit from this the most is somebody who feels that they relate to the term of a people pleaser.
Yeah, well, I think everyone benefits, but absolutely if you're a people pleaser, which means basically your worth is coming from the approval of others. We have research on this, actually, that if you're self-compassionate, your worth, because again, it comes from the inside, it's less dependent on the approval of others. Now, just for those of you who are thinking that it means, okay, it's going to be my way or the highway, that's not true either. I did a study where I looked, when there's a conflict situation between my needs and those of someone else, self-compassionate people are more likely to compromise. They don't say, my needs are important, screw you, but they also don't say, okay, I'll do whatever you want. It's like, okay, your needs are important, my needs are important. How do we come up with a win-win solution? Because everyone's needs are valid. And it's really a humble thing. It's not debasing yourself. It's not making yourself bigger than others. It's just saying we are all human beings. Everyone has certain rights to, fair treatment and getting their needs met. How do we come up with a solution that honors everyone, including ourselves, as opposed to just saying, Yeah, I'm a nurse. I'll work 3 shifts without sleeping. Who is that really helping?
Well, I guess like one of the moments that it could really help in that is because there's mindfulness in it. And I think a lot of the times we're now so reactive to situations. Like even I'm thinking for myself when I'm booking in work, I'm booking things back to back and then I end up becoming ill because I haven't taken a moment to be like, am I overfilling my diary? Am I committing myself too much? And actually when you become mindful, you take a beat and you kind of go, wait, how am I going to feel at the end of that week? And you become more connected to the present moment as opposed to kind of a bit of a fantasy that kind of your brain goes off into autopilot and decides that that's how your body's just going to have to cope with it. So I think like the mindfulness piece really shines through on that for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways mindfulness is essential to self-compassion. So one is just taking that pause to ask yourself what you need. You also said something which I want to follow up on because I think it's important. It's more of an esoteric point, but I'm going to take it anyway. Often we're living in the world of thoughts, right? Just thinking and planning and doing and problem solving. And that's useful. We need it. But thoughts are one step removed from reality. You can't eat the thought juicy peach. A juicy peach is an actual thing that you smell, it's actually a present moment experience. And a lot of our happiness and life satisfaction comes from living life fully, not just thinking about life or planning, but actually taking the time to savor that peach or to take a walk or spend time with our loved ones. And so one of the things about self-compassion, which mindfulness helps, is we aren't in our head all the time. So we actually come back to our body. One of the key self-compassion phrases, which you'll probably appreciate, is see if you can drop out of your head into your body. Because our body is where our presence is, and as I did that, just naturally I put my hands on my body, reconnecting with your body, which is where that feeling of warmth comes from, just through evolution. Think parents communicate care through touch. So touching your body, being in your body, feeling connected to your body, asking, what does my body need right now? Does it need to move? Do I need some nutritious food? It's a really key part of self-compassion. But our culture is always putting us in our heads and our thoughts. And that's partly why we become so disconnected. And then you're just, when it comes back to eating, you might just be eating at the computer, not even thinking about it. And, that's where we really start losing ourselves in the world of thought.
I think we can over intellectualize so many things, can't we? And that's such a danger of disconnection from our bodies. And we lose that childlike way as we grow up. We kind of lose that freedom that we have with our bodies to move it. And a lot of people say if you move your hips, you kind of release the trauma and it helps drive the energy through the body. And I try and think like, how many listeners are listening to this? When was the last time they moved their hips? In a way where they're kind of moving their body freely. Kind of as we become an adult, we become much more restrained in practices that we think we should be doing, which can make us feel very kind of boxed in.
Yes, I do actually a static dance. I like to go on Sunday morning. It's kind of, dance how you feel, not how you look. But a really simple practice, if you don't want to do something so extreme, is just taking a compassionate movement break. It's kind of like a stretch break, but the difference is you pause, you get up, you pause, you ask yourself, what does my body need right now? How does it need to move so that the movement is driven from the inside? What do I need to stretch? Oh, I realize my shoulders are really tight or my neck is tight or I need to, you can just do that for 5 minutes and it makes a big difference. And you are giving your body what you need, which is an act of self-compassion.
How did you come into all of this research? Because 20 years ago, I'm just thinking when I got into the field of nutrition.
You were probably 3, just about.
Yeah,
maybe not 3, but.
But I know. I wish I had this information at 3 years of age. I'd be the most compassionate human on the planet.
Yeah.
But when I got into the field of nutrition over 11 years ago, that still wasn't a conversation that was even happening. And that was quite generic. It was food. In the UK anyway, in America, it was 5 years ahead. But people didn't really know what that was and why that was important. People might find that shocking to hear now, but that is the truth. People did not know what a nutritionist was when I was studying it. And I remember that very well. And people think it was a dead-end career. No one really cares. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Neff was doing this 20 years ago in a conversation that even today people are struggling to connect with. So I want to know, like, how did you get into this? Because I always believe we're driven to this from a personal experience.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So like I said, I didn't come up with the idea. It was actually my last year of graduate school. I was getting my PhD. And I was under a lot of stress, and I learned that mindfulness meditation was good for stress. And so luckily for me, I learned mindfulness meditation in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Zen teacher. And he's one of the Buddhist teachers who always talked explicitly about self-compassion, about the fact that we need to turn compassion inward as well as outward. And so it really helped me at the time with some personal things I was going through and the stress I was facing. And that was actually 96. So a long time ago, almost, oh my gosh, we're heading on to almost 30 years. But, so it really helped me personally. And then, so I did a postdoc with a woman who was a self-concept researcher, because I started getting interested in Buddhism and what is the self and how does this self-concept cause us suffering. And that's when I started learning about self-esteem and how self-esteem is can be problematic. The need to be special and above average. It can lead to eating disorders or bullying behavior or all sorts of problems. And so then when I got the job at University of Texas at Austin, I started researching it. But, I'm very lucky. This is my life's work. It's a calling. I'll be doing this when I'm 75, as long as I can still speak. It's not going anywhere, because it is such a universal human principle. And because, again, it's not just culture that works against it, although it does. It also is our evolutionary instincts. So we're always going to need to intentionally remember about self-compassion. I do want to do one shout out. You do have someone in the UK who's, I would say probably me and him are probably the two, biggest names, if I can say that, in self-compassion. Sir Paul Gilbert. He has done a tremendous amount of work on self-compassion, especially developed a form of therapy called compassion-focused therapy. He's done really great work for those people. Some people are kind of, it's painful or scary to give themselves compassion. You've had to close down your heart. Maybe if you had early childhood trauma, you've had to close down your heart just to survive. And then when you start opening up your heart, the old pain can come flooding out. So, Paul Gilbert and compassion-focused therapy has done really good work helping people be self-compassionate, especially if they have had some trauma in their background. So shout out to Paul Gilbert.
We're going to get Paul on the show now.
Sir Paul Gilbert, actually. I think he's an OBE, or no, he's not. So he's an OBE. I don't know if that's a sir or not, but he's an amazing scholar. Yeah.
I'm just thinking how amazing that is to hear for people that are thinking, I'm so close, like telling myself an affirmation in the mirror is not going to make me feel better, or writing this down is not going to help me. And I think it is really important to mention, because we're talking about this and neither of us are saying it's easy. And you're saying, I've been doing this for 30 years and I still struggle. And trust me, I still struggle all the time. And I've only kind of been doing this for a few years, understanding all your work. And every day I'm like, be more compassionate. No, don't tell yourself off for not being compassionate. It's okay. You're human. And I'm kind of like, that's a really uncompassionate thing to say to yourself, Sarah. I'm rewinding what I'm saying. But I think, like, thinking about therapy, compassion-based therapy could be that's something I hadn't really thought about, but that could be a really helpful therapy for people that are struggling with this, for somebody else to kind of hold their hand through.
Yes. In fact, so there are several compassion-based therapies. There is compassion-focused therapy, which is a lot of practitioners in the UK. Also something called internal family systems, which you might call selves compassion, because it looks at different parts of ourselves. We give them compassion. But what we know is, actually, we're finding this in the research. Any effective therapy increases self-compassion. That's kind of what therapy does, is it helps people understand themselves, understand their patterns, have compassion for themselves. But yeah, so actually the phenomena I talked about is called either fear of compassion or backdraft is another term. And so it's really important to realize sometimes you give yourself compassion and you don't feel good. It doesn't necessarily make you feel better. Sometimes what it does is you open to the pain. And so you actually may feel worse at first. And that's not a problem. It's actually a good sign. It means you're opening to the pain that you are kind of hiding inside of yourself. But it does mean you want to go slowly. And sometimes it means you want to have someone to help hold it for you, especially a clinician. You can, especially if it's linked to trauma. It can be a lot to deal with yourself. So having a friend or having a therapist help you in this path, help you hold the pain, can be very, very useful.
I think because therapy, especially in the UK, a little bit different to America, isn't as widely spoken about over here still. It's got so much better, but there are so many different types of therapy. And my fear with a lot of people or listeners that kind of get in contact with me is I tried therapy, it doesn't work, and I'm giving up. And it hasn't been the right therapist, or it's not been the right type of therapy. And so it scares people to kind of go back, or they think I'm broken and it's not going to help me, which again is not true.
Yeah, you do have to find the right therapist. And I think I would ask any therapist, what's your familiarity with self-compassion? And also mindfulness can be very helpful. By the way, I've got a term for all you Brits who the word self-compassion, the word self and the word compassion is like, that's not stiff upper lip. Another word equally good, another term is inner strength training. Just think of it as inner strength training. You don't need to use the word self. You don't need use the word compassion. You can use the word strength because that's what it is. It means what happens when the tough stuff comes up, when, the difficult thought or emotion or situation. How do I be strong within myself? How do I have my own back? How do I, my body's already conceived doing this. That's what self-compassion is showing up for yourself in a strong, supportive way when things are difficult or threatening or scary or challenging. And so if that word self-compassion doesn't work for you, don't use it. There's nothing special about the word. Call it inner strength training or inner resilience or anything that works for you. You don't want to be bogged down by words, and also if you talk about it to other people, self-compassion. So what we trained athletes, high-level college athletes in self-compassion. We didn't call it self-compassion. We did call it inner strength training. By the way, what did we find when they gave themselves this support? We had them think of like a really supportive coach who would be kind, but firm and clear and like supportive. And we found that they actually improved their athletic performance by treating themselves with this support.
I mean, it's literally changing your inner critic, isn't it? Which we haven't actually spoke about, but that inner critic that sits in your head that I say to my patients, give that a name. And somebody the other day gave an amazing name. They called it Rain, which obviously kind of felt really like heavy and like, and they dissociated that kind of inner critic. So, it's there, but it's not your best friend. It's that friend that can sometimes try and deviate you off the track. And trying to give it another name can be really helpful. And then it sounds like for you, then knowing that there's a coach on the other side that's kind of cheering you on is the much more friendly voice, the much more kind of friend that you want to go and see.
Yeah, it is. I would have some suggestion though when working with your inner critic, because the inner critic is like a tantruming 3-year-old who only knows one way to get your attention, and that is by screaming and shouting and banging its arms. It actually is trying to help you, believe it or not. This is really key. Your inner critic is frightened. It sees a problem. It's afraid the world's going to come to an end, or you're going to do something that's really hurtful. Other people will hate you. So it's trying desperately to get your attention and get you to change so you will be safe. So we want to befriend our inner critic. We don't want to listen to it. We don't want that tantruming 3-year-old running the show. But we want to. So, like for instance, my son. So he has a strong inner critic. He's autistic, and everyone has an inner critic. But I can kind of hear him. He speaks out loud. I didn't teach him to be critical, but for him, he gets frightened, and it's like he externalizes. He imagines someone else being mad at him and yelling at him. And so this is like the internalization, the inner critic yells at him and is mad at him as a way he thinks is going to keep himself safe. So we've taught him to just say, tricky brain, I know you're trying to keep me safe, but you really aren't helping very much right now. And then we invite in the more supportive coach voice. So, it's really important. This part of ourself is trying to help. It's just not very effective. So we don't want to get rid of it. We want to make sure we listen to it because it is pointing out a danger. It's like saying, okay, I need to look at this. And then you open it up to that more supportive coach voice who's going to be a lot more effective than the 3-year-old in motivating a change. But, all parts of ourselves, they're there for a reason. They're trying to help us, but some of them are just very misguided, you might say.
And I think our evolution has changed so much from the danger of that tiger that everyone hears all the time about having to kill us in the middle of the night. That actually sometimes when that inner critic is so strong and we're losing sleep from it and we're worrying all the time constantly, it does drain our energy and it does make us sick. So
it does. You can say, thank you for trying to keep me safe. But, I think another part of me has got this. The inner coach or actually more capable. And so it's funny, once you reassure the inner critic that you've got it, you listen, and that you're on top of it, you'll deal with the danger, then it's like, okay, then I can rest. And the inner critic actually wants to rest. It's exhausting being an inner critic, but you want to be an inner critic all day long? Give it a break, give it a vacation. But you got to let it know that someone else is going to take charge. So it's not the end of the world. It's interesting how these things work, but
it is because it's also very similar to if you had a 3-year-old crying. If you literally ignore that child, it's going to carry on. If you talk to that child directly and tell that child, it's safe, it's okay, I hear your concerns, I'm pretty sure, not all the time, but 80% of that time, that child will come around to feeling really assured and be quiet.
That's right. Yeah.
So Kristin, what is for you? I know that you're like, I'm going to keep carrying this on till I'm 70 or 80 or however long we keep going for, which I'm obviously very thrilled about. For you, what's like your next areas that you really want to tackle in the research of self-compassion?
So I'm actually not doing research anymore. I kind of, after 20 years, I felt I'd done enough. And now I'm really focused on helping people be more self-compassionate. That's what lights me up. So one of the areas I'm interested in, it kind of comes from, you might say, my spiritual side. For me, self-compassion is partly spiritual. Spiritual in the way Dan Siegel defines spiritual, or some people, is connecting with something bigger than yourself, right? And so as opposed to religion, which is a set of beliefs, it's really just about connecting with something bigger than kind of our small, separate self that feels limited. And actually, if you look at what self-compassion is, we're used to it. When you're giving compassion to a friend or a loved one, we don't feel limited. We aren't even thinking about ourselves. We feel connected. We feel connected to the person we're caring for. All these things come online. We feel loving. We feel connected. We feel present. We naturally do it. So one of the things I'm really interested in helping people see is that when you give yourself compassion, one way of looking at it is we're shifting our perspective from the small, limited, separate self to the larger, more interconnected, loving self. And you can think of that as a spiritual movement. We're connecting with something larger than our small selves. So I'm starting to teach some retreats actually with a friend of mine who's a meditation teacher, and we'll see where this goes. But it's very satisfying to me because that's, it's more than just a self-help thing or a mental thing. It really is about seeing who we really are, which is a loving, compassionate heart, more than just our little limited selves.
It's letting yourself flourish.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And others. I mean, it's really about interconnection. And, the sense that we're these separate egos, it's really just an illusion that our thoughts tell us. And then happiness. This is what's interesting, Sarah. You can be in a moment of pain and you stop identifying with what's happening. And you start identifying with how are you holding what's happening? What's the loving, connected presence that the pain is arising in? It's like a perspective shift. And you believe it or not, you can actually be peaceful, happy, satisfied, even in a moment of pain, because you aren't just the pain. You're actually the love holding the pain. And that shift is where true happiness and peace comes from. At least that's what I've found. Some people don't want to go there, and that's fine. If you want to use it as self-help, that's okay. But that's what lights me up, is allowing people to connect with their bigger self.
Well, I think that's so important because we can get so stuck in our tunnel vision lens of only seeing life through one way. And that's when it actually becomes very stressful because we don't feel like we have the power to change it. And we do.
That's right.
Which is really powerful. I'm very excited to see what's going to happen next. And as I said, you've been a huge inspiration. And I really hope that people connect to self-compassion and feel, I want them to feel worthy of it, because I think a lot of the times when people don't connect to it, it's because they don't actually feel much worth around it. And so it can feel really scary.
Yeah, and it's so listen, here's the news. All you need to do to be worthy of compassion is to be a flawed human being. If you can check that box, you're in the club. You know, but it is heartbreaking that some people don't feel they're worthy, and a lot of people have told they aren't worthy, and that's kind of the whole self-esteem mindset, that some people are more worthy than others of esteem. Everyone is worthy of love and compassion, you know, and especially yourself, because you know you're the only being whom you know intimately, because you're inside your own head. So that's really the place to start.
Yeah. And that will be a predictor of your happiness, which I am such a big believer in. And do you know what? The biggest thing I say is free.
That's right. It's free. It is. And it's always available 24/7 in the middle of the night when life has gone to hell. You still have your compassionate awareness. Your heart is still there. And that, again, once you realize that that's really where happiness and peace and fulfillment comes from, it's not dependent on circumstances. Not only is it free in terms of cost, it is freedom itself. Wow, that was a really good ending line, huh?
It's like you prepared it. Like you knew what you were going to say.
It just came up.
Well, that does leave me with my final question, because I don't think I can follow on from that. That was like a mic drop moment. I always ask all my guests the last leaving question, which I'm very excited to hear what your answer is, which is, what does live well, be well mean to you?
Well, I bet you can give me $5 if you know.
I'll give you 500.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, yeah. So live well, be well. I mean, it is. Well, I guess it is being in the moment in an open-hearted way. So opening your heart, starting with yourself, and then everything. So being open-hearted, including pain, open-hearted with pain, but also noticing the open heart also notices the beauty. Just noticing the beauty of nature, or noticing what's right as well as what's wrong. Opening that. One way of talking about the three components of self-compassion is loving, connected presence. That's kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So live well, be well for me is more than just self-compassion. Compassion is only in the realm of pain. It's much bigger. Live well, be well is being in loving, connected presence with everything. The beauty, the joy, as well as the pain, all of it, moment to moment.
It's what you said earlier, bigger than self.
Bigger than self, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really hope that we can do this again. And
yes, it's been lovely. Yeah.
I would love for you to share, because I know you have so many amazing resources on your website. I'm going to put the link in the show notes for the brand new book, which is out now for everybody to buy. But please just share where everyone can kind of find all of your resources, or the best places to connect with you.
Yeah. So if you just Google self-compassion, I'm at selfcompassion.org, you'll find me. I have a lot of free resources. I've got guided practices and exercises. You can sign up for my newsletter. Every month I write something and it's got a little practice in it. But also recently I started something called the Self-Compassion Community as another way for people to practice. It's very inexpensive, but you can go to monthly gatherings with me. You can ask me a question. I have special guests on, like Tara Brock's coming in November. We have mentor sessions with highly experienced teachers to help you in your self-compassion practice. I got videos. So it's really a new way to deepen your self-compassion practice. So if you're interested, you may want to check that out. Oh, you can also take the self-compassion scale, the test I created, if you want to know your self-compassion level. So it's really the best place to start at selfcompassion.org.
Yeah. Amazing. I'm so glad that was one of my questions. I was in my own world in this conversation. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that right at the end. Thank you so much for coming on to Live Well, Be Well.
Thank you. And thank you for spreading the good word, Sarah.